Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, The Role of Leadership and Change Management and Organization Alignment. My name is Deshler, and I'm joined today by Mike Smith, my colleague. Let's do a couple of logistics before we dive into our topic. Hopefully everyone is, as you're dialing in, being able to see the control panel, and that should be on the left side of your screen. And you should also be seeing today's presentation. Under the View option, in your application, you can make selections for what you actually see on the screen. And Mike and I will both be sharing our webcams today. One of the benefits of that is you can see Mike and I live. One of the challenges is it can sometimes, on certain connections, slow the transmission down. If you have that problem, just close those windows, and it should continue to operate in pretty normal speed. Everyone today is going to be muted. That said, we invite questions throughout our presentation, and there's a dialog box where you can enter questions, and those questions will come to Mike and I, and we'll do our best to respond to those throughout the presentation. And if there's some at the end as well, we'll take some time at the end of the presentation to answer those. We really appreciate those questions when they come in. If the control panel for any reason is blocking your screen, you can hit the orange arrow, and that will collapse it so that you'll be able to see the full presentation. The final logistical note is if you are interested in receiving SHRM professional development credits for participating in today's webcast, you'll need to answer the questions that will pop up after we close the webinar. And if you respond to those, then you'll be able to receive those credits. If you have any trouble with anything after the webinar or as we go through it, please email Vani Saxey. Her email was in the invitation, and she can help with any logistical issues. Final note, all of the slides from today's presentation, as well as the recording of the presentation, will be available later this week, and you'll receive an email notification when it's available. So with that said, Mike and I want to dive into today's content. We're excited to be able to talk on this subject. It's a subject that we have a lot of energy around. We work with leaders constantly in our practice, and we recognize how important that role that leaders play as they drive change and as they help set their organizations up for success. Now, just to give some context, Mike and I both work at AlignOrg Solutions, and many of you may already be familiar with us, but where we spend our time is working with typically large organizations, helping them set their strategy, diagnose their capabilities to win in the marketplace, align their organization through the organization design, business model, and then certainly we help them implement the change and lead through the process of realizing the benefits of a new organization. We do spend a lot of our time, in addition to the projects and engagements we do with our clients, building capability. We like to, not only in these kinds of venues, share insights and learnings and concepts, but we also do it with our clients as they build strong internal capabilities for their practitioners inside their company. So that's a little bit about us. Today, we're going to be sharing stories from a variety of different organizations. Some of these that we've shown here on this page, and some others that we are working with, some that we've all read about. The great thing about the press is that there's always great design change stories going on. And so we like to use those as ways to underscore some of the learnings and principles that we're finding as we go about this work. So with that said, Mike and I kind of want to kick things off by highlighting a set of relationships that we're seeing increasingly in organizations. The first relationship, not surprising to anyone, is along the bottom here. It's that organizations are becoming increasingly complex. That complexity is coming from a variety of sources. I think most of us are familiar with them. Some of it's geographic or globalization type complexities. Some of it is around ownership complexities, whether it be publicly traded, privately held, some mix. So different ownership structures create complexity. We certainly see a lot of complexity as it pertains to product offerings. in the sense that more and more customers and consumers are looking for complete solutions and they're looking for experiences, which demands a whole lot more coordination and planning and integration for organizations and partners to deliver on those expectations. And so there's just a lot of things driving complexity. The other dimension, as you can see, deals with speed. And I think we're all feeling this pressure to do things faster because every day, every minute, every week that passes, if we're not making change or effectively capturing good results in the market, someone else is, and someone else is jumping in line ahead of us. And so if we think about these two dimensions, what I think Mike and I are really keen to look at today is the relationship between how change and alignment leadership competencies come to play as these two dimensions affect organizations. And the reason that we've drawn the arrow in this fashion is because we believe that as complexity increases and as the speed of change in organizations increases, the change and alignment leader competencies that are required has to increase as well. And the final note that I'll make here, and I'm going to hand it to Mike because he's going to really kind of dive into this in some depth. But when we think about change leadership, we're going to talk about the ability of an organization and a leader to affect lasting, sustainable behavioral change in the organization. And when we talk about alignment leadership, we're talking about this notion of a leader being able to set an organization up and align all of the systems and choices to deliver extraordinary results. And that's not an easy task. And when things are simple, when the speed of change is pretty slow, a lot of folks can sit down and kind of put the pieces together. But when it starts to move at warp speed and we see a lot of complexity, that's when the leadership demands for executives really kicks into gear. So with that, Mike, before I hand it to Mike, I'm getting ahead of myself. There is a concept here that we want to sort of level set around. And here's the notion. And Mike and I like to talk a lot about this idea of real change. You might say, well, what's real change versus just ordinary change or transformational change? For us, real change is about the situation when people in organizations' behavior actually changes to where you can see it and where you can get the results from it, better or worse. And so when we think about real change, we're thinking about three fundamental conditions. The first is the change works for the organization. It makes sense, and it's going to lead to a competitive advantage. There's a degree of fit. There's a degree of alignment to what the organization's trying to do. We hate to see situations where an organization is adopting a best practice, like a new system, for example, because their peers are doing it in the market. But it may or may not make sense in the same context for this particular organization. So the first condition for us is that change really makes strategic sense. The second condition is that the change becomes part of the real work of the organization. It's not just a side program or a one-time initiative that's kind of imposed from outside or from the top, but it's really at the core of the work of the organization. We often say that if someone's job doesn't change, then you really have not possibly changed a whole lot. And so part of us for thinking about real change, it's getting to a point where it is part of the real work of the organization. And then the final condition for us is that there is a strong leadership team that has a good vision of where they want to take the organization, and they're involved in the process. This is not just a pure cascade of information or of a particular set of objectives or tactics. This is something where the leaders are invested, where they are being influential, they're active, they're involved, and as a leadership team, they are aligned around where they're trying to move things. And so when we think about change, we think of it as really a process, a series of interconnected steps that leads to these outcomes. And we believe that a change leader, a real change leader, is someone who really understands these steps and is able to connect these issues.